I want to belong to you tonight, Amara Cole whispered, trembling as she pressed her face against Jonas Mercer's chest inside the log cabin that shook beneath the storm. A black woman just pulled back from the edge of death. Her breath burned hot in the arms of a widower who had buried his heart for 10 long years. The fire cracked, their shadows etched against the wall like a confession. Jonas froze, torn between the vow made at an old grave and the desire roaring in his blood. But could one fateful night break through 10 winters of solitude? Or would it only open the door to a trial fiercer than the storm outside? The wind howled in long, feral cries, like a lost beast wandering the Montana mountains. On the steep slope, snowflakes slashed the earth like 1,000 knives, burying every trace of life. Jonas Mercer pulled his worn wool coat tight, bending low against the storm. Each step sank past his calves. Every lift of his boots weighted as if carrying the mountain itself. He had meant only to stitch another bundle of firewood to keep the stove alive through the night. But when he opened the cabin door, the gale struck him square, near knocking him off his feet. Jonas was not surprised. 10 winters had hardened him to such fury. What he did not expect was that tonight's storm would tear open a vow he believed buried with his wife. In his mind, her words rose again. I will never let my heart stir again. I live the rest of my days for her and her alone. 10 years ago, he had held her frozen body while the wind drowned out his cries. Since then, he had built a cabin in the mountains, living as a hermit, growing corn, tending horses, hunting deer. No laughter. No one allowed inside his heart. But tonight, above the roaring wind, another sound came, faint, fragile, a cry torn apart by the storm. At first he thought his ears deceived him. Blizzards often birthed strange echoes, yet it came again, trembling, desperate. Jonas tightened his grip on the axe, heart pounding. Lantern flickering in hand, he trudged down the slope. Against the blinding white, a small, dark shape emerged. A body. He froze. His chest clenched with memory. The night of white snow, a woman's body already cold in his arms. His limbs locked, but his feet carried him forward. Dropping to his knees, he brushed away the snow. The dim glow fell across the face of a young black woman. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, lips blue and barely parted, as if to call for something she could no longer name. Her breath was shallow, flickering, nearly gone. Lord, Jonas's voice rasped, trembling with cold or fear. Sliding his arms beneath her, he lifted her slight frame. She felt weightless, limp as if drained of life. The chill seeped through his thick coat into his own skin. He held her tighter, shoulders broad against the wind, and forced his way uphill. Every step was a battle. Snow whipped his face raw, the lantern died long ago, and only the dim sky above offered its ghostly light. In his arms, her faint breaths stabbed his chest with each fragile rise. The cabin door loomed, rattling beneath the storm's fists. Jonas heaved his shoulder against it, shoved it open, and staggered inside. He kicked it shut, set her down by the hearth. The fire was nearly ash, embers fading. He threw on dry wood, bent low, and blew until the flames leapt up. Orange light spread across her face. Amara Cole, though he would not know her name until later. Her cheeks were hollow, lashes quivering, lips purple and mute. Jonas dropped beside her, calloused hand to her forehead. Her skin was ice. His chest wrenched tight. In that moment, his vow felt as brittle as paper set to flame. He was no longer the man who buried his heart with his wife, only a man fighting to hold on to a fragile breath. Firelight danced over his trembling hands as they touched her pale skin. At times, her eyes fluttered open, brushing his gray gaze. In that instant, Jonas felt as though he too was being pulled back from a pit of solitude. He wrapped her in a fur blanket, sat close listening for her fragile breaths. Each one drawn gave him back his own heartbeat, strong and urgent, as if for the first time in 10 years. Outside, the storm howled to devour the mountains. But in the small cabin, the fire had risen again, and with it, the first crack in a heart he once believed had turned to stone. The fire in the hearth flared up, red light sweeping across the rough log walls. Yet Amara's body still shook with violent tremors. Her breath came fast and broken, as if the storm itself still clung to her skin. Jonas knelt beside her, eyes shifting between the flames and her pale face, a nameless dread rising inside him. The wool cloak he had wrapped around her was soaked through, clinging to her skin. He knew too well, if she remained in wet cloth, she would not survive the night. The thought that followed tightened his throat. He would have to strip it away. His broad, calloused hands rested on her shoulders. He drew in a breath, voice rough, speaking to the fire, to her, to himself. "Forgive me. If I don't get these off, you won't make it." Amara lay half-conscious, eyes closed, lips trembling soundlessly. No consent, no refusal, only a body convulsing, cold enough to turn blue. Jonas clenched his jaw. His fingers fumbled at the frozen buttons, skin splitting until blood welled at his nails. Each snap of a button sounded like the crack of something breaking inside him. Cloth peeled from skin, revealing dark flesh gone numb, steam rising as from ice left too long in the open. Jonas shuddered, partly from the cold, partly from the fragile sight laid bare before him. He worked clumsily, slowly, as though whispering a prayer for mercy while undressing a stranger. When the last garment fell away, he quickly swaddled her in heavy fur blankets. But he knew blankets alone would not be enough. The cold had sunk into her bones. Only one way remained: his own warmth. He sat frozen, fists white on the blanket's edge. The vow returned. No more feeling, no more heart to give. Yet Amara's ragged breath dragged him back. She was slipping, and he could not stand by. Jonas drew back the covers, lowered himself, and pulled her against his chest. Skin to skin, her frozen body jolted through him like a shock of lightning. He held tighter, wrapping them both in fur, forcing his heartbeat and heat into her. "I'll close my eyes. I won't look," he muttered, a fool's promise to himself. Her back pressed to his chest, his breath warming her tangled, sweat and snow-drenched hair. Each shiver from her frame tore at his heart. His hand rested on her shoulder, then slid, hesitant, trembling, down her thin arm. Her skin was ice, urging him to grip harder, as if letting go meant losing her forever. The cabin filled with crackling wood and the storm's howl outside. Inside, Jonas heard only his own heart hammering, wild, uneven. 10 years of silence, of locked emotion, set ablaze by one faint breath, one trembling body in his arms. "Don't give up. Please don't give up," he whispered, his breath hot against her neck, shaming him with its intimacy. Unconsciously, Amara nestled closer, seeking his warmth. Her hair brushed his jaw, damp and soft, carrying the scent of smoke and salt. Jonas squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the ooze, dizziness of memory. Behind his lids, his wife's face rose, her gentle smile buried under snow. The ache nearly crushed him, yet his arms reminded him of the present, a life depending on him. He pulled the blankets higher, gripping so hard his knuckles strained. He told himself it was duty, nothing more. But his body betrayed him, heart racing, breath ragged, heat burning wherever they touched. Pity and desire tangled so tightly, he could no longer tell them apart. He pressed his cheek to her hair, whispering hoarsely, "Hold on, Amara. I won't let you go." That night, Jonas did not loosen his embrace. Whenever her breath faltered, he drew her tighter. When it steadied, he eased, only to clutch again when she shivered. Firelight cast their entwined shadows on the log walls. Outside, snow buried the mountains the wind keened on. In a cabin once filled with only one man's breath, for the first time in 10 years, there were two. And Jonas knew a deeper crack had been carved into the vow he thought unshakable. The night after her rescue, Amara's breath did not ease as Jonas had hoped. Instead, her small chest heaved too fast, her skin burning like live coals. The little cabin, long accustomed to the smell of smoke and pine pitch, now filled with the sharp scent of sweat mixed with dried herbs Jonas had set to boil. He placed the basin by her bed, wrung out a rag, and laid it carefully across her brow. In moments, the cloth dried stiff from the heat. Jonas changed it again, his hands once steady with rifle and axe, awkward, trembling now. His gray eyes, dulled by years of snow and solitude, clung to her face. He feared that if he looked away even for a breath, hers might vanish. The cramped room flickered in firelight. Jonas sat the long hours through, back aching, eyes raw, yet he did not move. Each time he changed the cloth, he brushed tangled hair from her brow, as if touch alone might call her back from the dark. Then, in the depths of night, Amara's lips moved. Her voice, faint as wind, carried words that pierced him like a blade. "Don't force me. I don't want. Under the same roof." Jonas froze. In that instant, the storm outside no longer held his fear. What broke him instead was the pain behind her words. He did not understand it all, but he knew enough. Amara had been struck down by more than cold. Some shadow, some chain, had driven her to this brink. His hand stilled on her brow, drops of water falling to the worn blanket. Firelight carved his face hard, eyes deep and burning with a rare fury. Pity and anger tangled within him. Anger that someone had left a young woman so broken she cried out even in dreams. Anger that he, who once vowed never to fall again, now sat powerless over a life trembling in his care. He bent low, voice rough, nearly breaking. "No one will force you here, not under this roof." But Amara did not hear. She twisted in fever, lips cracking with words meant for ghosts. Time crawled. The fire surged and waned, but Jonas remained, his eyes never leaving her face. Memory rose unbidden, his wife's cheeks flushed with fever, then paling to stillness. The weight of it drove into him, yet all he let slip was a ragged breath and the bite of his nails into his thigh to hold himself steady. He changed the cloth again and again, thick fingers pressed to Amara's wrist for the faint pulse. Firelight sharpened her gaunt features, lashes quivering, lips cracked yet still whispering. Once more her words came clearer. "I don't want to be a thing." Jonas felt blood surge to his temples. The words tore his chest apart. He understood then. Amara had been treated like a commodity, denied choice, denied her own life. His gaze darkened. In the shadowed cabin, a fracture split the vow he had held 10 years. He was no longer merely a man who swore to live for a memory. He was now a man who could not turn from another's pain. By dawn, the snow outside lay thick as ever. Inside, Jonas laid a fresh cloth on her brow. Her skin still burned, but her breathing had steadied some. He slumped back, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Firelight softened the harsh lines of his face for a fleeting moment. He knew the battle was not done. Fever could return. But deep within, Jonas also knew he had crossed a line. His oath, never again to let his heart be moved, was no longer solid as ice on the mountain slope. A crack had opened, born of Amara Cole's faint breath and fevered words. The storm still roared outside, but within the cabin, another warmth smoldered, the warmth of a heart learning, after long silence, to tremble once more. When the storm eased, pale sunlight slipped through the narrow cracks of the log walls. Amara opened her eyes, the first time in many long days of fever. Her dark pupils flickered, unsure if what she saw was real. Rough-hewn walls, a hearth still glowing, and the mingled scent of smoke and pine resin. She tried to rise, but her arms gave way, limp as water. At once, a tall figure filled the doorway. Jonas, hair gray and unkempt, frame broad and solid, knocked snow from a log. His gray eyes flicked toward her, lingered only a heartbeat, then turned away. "You should lie down," he said, voice rough, clipped more like command than care. Amara meant to answer, but her throat was raw. Only a rasp escaped. Jonas set the wood in the stove, poured water, and held the cup to her. Her hand shook as she reached, brushing his calloused fingers. The touch was fleeting, yet enough to send a shiver through her. Jonas drew in a sharp breath and looked away. The days that followed bound the two strangers to one cabin. Amara slowly regained strength. Still weak, she refused to remain idle. One afternoon, she staggered toward the kitchen. Jonas, splitting wood on the porch, heard the noise and strode inside, frowning. "What are you doing?" "I can't just lie there. I can help." Her voice was faint, but firm. He looked at her, something between annoyance and something unnamed in his gaze. Without a word, he nodded. So Amara began, tending the fire, kneading dough. The first loaves burned black, filling the cabin with bitter smoke. Jonas grimaced, ready to step in, but she forced a small smile. "I'll try again. Don't worry." Jonas said nothing. Yet that night, when the last loaf filled the room with warm, sweet scent, he breathed deep, and his chest eased for the first time in years. The cabin, once steeped only in ash and sweat, now carried another note, strange, sweet, but not unwelcome. They spoke little. Jonas answered in single words, "Yes," "No," "Leave it." Yet in those silences, a fragile thread began to weave. Once Amara fell asleep at the table, beans scattered in her hands. Jonas passed by, paused, and quietly laid a blanket over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her hair, softer, warmer than he expected. She stirred, eyes catching his just as he withdrew. Their gazes met, collided, then fled apart. Another time, as Amara set a bowl of soup on the table, Jonas reached at the same moment. Their hands touched, heat passing from the clay to skin. Both froze. She pulled away quick, heart hammering. Jonas cleared his throat, feigning interest in the spoon. Through the meal, neither lifted their eyes. Day by day, the cabin stayed quiet, filled with the crackle of wood and the wind outside. But within, the silence no longer cut cold. There were stolen glances, hesitant brushes, unspoken breaths. Jonas kept his hard shell, yet whenever he saw Amara wobble across the floor or stubbornly knead dough with weak hands, something stirred deep in his chest. A mix of pity and a yearning he thought buried with his wife. Amara, in turn, watched his broad shoulders bent over the fire, the glow tracing his rough frame. Gratitude welled in her, gratitude and unease. This man, with few words and clumsy gestures, had hauled her back from death. And now, in silence, the cabin no longer felt a prison. It felt, if only barely, like shelter. One night, Amara stood at the window, watching snow cloak the mountain white. Jonas passed, paused just long enough to say, "Tomorrow, if you're stronger, you can come with me to the stables." No more, no less. Yet to Amara, it felt like a door opening. Outside, the sky spread with stars. Inside, the fire burned, casting two shadows closer than before, not with words, but with silences heavy with meaning. The road out of Cedar Ridge cut a muddy scar through patches of snow. The sky hung gray, wind threading the pines with a bite sharp enough to flay skin. Jonas sat up front, reins gripped tight. Amara sat behind, huddled in a cloak, scarf pulled close around her head. They had bought salt, flour, a handful of cartridges, and a roll of linen. Neither spoke. The whispers in town, the stares like dull knives, still pressed against her neck. The sleigh jolted over frozen ruts. A faint snap. The edge of Amara's cloak flipped, tugging loose an old envelope that dropped into slush. Jonas yanked the reins, swung down. There it lay, yellowed, edges frayed, the red seal cracked. He stooped, rough fingers closing over it. The words struck him at once. Marriage contract, Malcolm Ashworth. A tear in the paper revealed the cold print inside. The bride shall reside with the gentleman and his mistress. Jonas froze, blood gone hard. He looked up. Amara sat rigid, eyes wide, face ashen. She meant to leap down, but her knees buckled. The cold sliced through her bones. Jonas folded the envelope, voice low, each word weighted. Yours. He held it up. She took it, fingers clamped white around the edge. A tear slid, blotting the broken seal. They climbed back on. The horse trotted on. The road stretched long and silent. Only the sleigh bells, the creak of leather, the wind. Jonas stared ahead, jaw tight, the envelope's heat burning in his palm. Amara pressed it to her chest, breath shallow, eyes locked on the trail, afraid to meet his. The forest thinned. Snow cracked under the runners, spraying like cold foam. Then, barely above a whisper, Amara said, "I did not choose this." Jonas gave no answer. The reins groaned in his grip. His shoulders bore a weight that felt half fury, half something he had no name for. The cabin came into view, door shuddering in the wind. Jonas dismounted, lifted the latch. They carried in the sacks, salt, flour, powder, set them on the table. The fire flared orange, yet the air stayed cold. Amara laid the envelope down before her. She did not sit. She did not flee. She stood as though awaiting judgment. Jonas turned, back to the window, eyes on the dark pines. When he spoke, his voice rasped like stone on iron. Why carry it with you? Amara swallowed. Because if I left it, he'd say I stole the promise. If I carried it, I still had the choice to burn it. Her lips trembled. But I wasn't strong enough. Jonas said nothing. The fire cracked. His shadow leaned long across the wall. In his mind, his wife's face rose, flushed with fever, paling, fading. He had buried his heart with her and sworn it would not stir again. And yet, in weeks, this stranger had cracked the ice. Now, one slip of paper, and the crack widened into pain. He stepped to the table, fingers brushing the seal. The dried red wax looked like blood. He didn't need to read further. It was clear. A contract that made a woman property. Property to be shared. His chest churned with sickness and fury, not only at the man who wrote it, but at himself for ever doubting her. If the town knew, he said slowly, still not looking at her, they'd side with the man who bore the seal. His eyes snapped sharp as steel toward her. And me? What am I to do with this in my house? Amara closed her eyes, drew a breath like swallowing fire. Cast me out, if you must. But do not think I came here to hide filth. I ran to keep one shred of dignity. I keep it so I can tear it in front of him. For an instant, Jonas's gaze faltered. The muscles in his sun-worn face twitched. He stepped back, as if her calm, desperate words had struck him off balance. But old wounds do not close with one plea. He turned away. I'll sleep in the barn tonight, he said, voice flat. Lock the door. The latch fell. Wind whined through the cracks. Amara sank into the chair, clutching the envelope like a thorn. Tears came slow, then steady, falling over her trembling hands. Outside, Jonas leaned against the barn post, staring into black woods. His breath smoked in the night. In his mind, voices from the town echoed, their contempt for her. He remembered his wife's fever, remembered his own hand pressed to this girl's frozen skin, holding a spark of life. His heart, the heart he thought stone, beat heavy, asking with each thud, whom will you protect? The dead or the living? Night deepened. Amara rose, set the envelope by the fire. Flames licked its edge, glowing red. She hesitated. The words crawled in her vision. The bride shall reside with the gentleman and his mistress. Her hand shook. The paper charred at the corner. Then she pulled it back. Not yet. Not out of fear, but because she meant to tear it before his eyes. The door opened. Jonas stood in the threshold, snow on his shoulders. His eyes fell on the half-burned paper, then on Amara's tearless face. Neither spoke. Only the fire popped. Tomorrow, Jonas said, voice no longer sharp, only worn. We ride to town again. For what? Amara asked softly. To buy nails, he answered, eyes fixed on her. And to be ready when he comes. Her lips trembled, not with fear, but with the first spark of warmth. She nodded. Jonas stepped inside, fed the fire. On the wall, their shadows, one broad, one slight, stood long and still, as though the cabin itself held its breath. Outside, the wind rose, combing the pines. But inside, between fire and silence, truth had been named. Distance remained, but not the gulf of suspicion, rather the space of two souls learning to stand side by side against a darkness that now bore a name. And at that border, Jonas's heart cracked, not to break, but to make room for the choice that lay ahead. That afternoon, storm clouds churned over the Montana peaks, light fading as though the sky itself would be swallowed whole. Jonas was splitting wood on the porch when hoofbeats pounded through the foam. He straightened, jaw tightening. 3 riders emerged, their silhouettes carved against the snow. At their head rode Malcolm Ashworth, silk cloak snapping in the wind, a sneer etched across a face pale with cold. Flanking him, 2 hired guns with the sharp eyes of men too familiar with blood. Malcolm raised a weathered envelope, its red seal smudged. His voice cut the wind. "Amara Cole, you belong to me. This contract bears the mark. Holt, you're keeping my lawful bride." The cabin door swung wide. Amara stood framed by firelight, her face drained white, dark eyes wide. She shook as if old wounds had split open fresh. Jonas lifted his rifle from his shoulder and stepped onto the porch, a wall of raw timber. His growl carried like gravel under boot. "Get off this land, Malcolm." Malcolm laughed, waving the paper. "You think you stand against the law? The whole town knows my claim. You're nothing but a mountain widower." A small crowd had gathered on the slope. Whispers, chuckles, eyes cutting toward Amara, heavy with scorn. Jonas raised the rifle, his gray stare cold as iron. "One step closer and you'll bleed in the snow." The air froze. Malcolm's gunmen reached for their grips, but Jonas's stillness held them. 10 years alone in the wild had taught him the difference between bluff and truth. At last Malcolm jerked the reins, laughing sharp and bitter. "Fine, Holt. But contracts don't vanish because you wish them so. She'll return to me." Soon, the riders vanished into the trees, their threat echoing in the wind. The townsfolk drifted away, their mutters left behind like thorns. Jonas lowered the rifle, shoulders trembling. He turned and found Amara clinging to the doorway, fists clenched till blood rose under her nails. Her breath came ragged, eyes red-rimmed, his voice rasped. "He'll be back. But you won't face him alone." That night, the cabin glowed with fire. Snow sealed the door. Wind howled like wolves lost on the ridge. Jonas sat at the table, an old jug of corn whiskey between them. He had avoided the bottle for years. It carried ghosts he buried. But after Malcolm's threat, after seeing Amara's fear, his armor cracked. He uncorked it, poured into tin cups. The amber liquid caught the firelight. Jonas drank deep, flames scalding down his throat. Amara watched, then lifted her cup, sipping small. Warmth spread, coloring her cheeks. Silence hung heavy. Only the crackle of logs, the storm's cry outside. Amara set down her cup, her dark gaze steady on him. Her voice was soft, but clear. "You keep me at arm's length because of my past?" Jonas stilled. His hand clenched the cup, veins rising. He meant to deflect, but whiskey burned down his guard. His eyes met hers, voice breaking like stone split. "No. I fear myself." He drew a hard breath. "For 10 years, I buried my heart with my wife. I swore I'd never feel again. But since you came, I can't keep the distance, and it feels like betrayal." Amara reached across, her small hand resting over his. Warm, trembling, but firm. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Jonas, memories don't vanish, but the living deserve to live. want to belong to you." Jonas's chest thundered, heart beating against its prison. He bent, pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was rough, trembling, the first of a man starved of touch for a decade. Amara closed her eyes, arms rising around his shoulders, drawing him in. The kiss deepened, hesitant, then fierce, like a fire whipped alive by wind. Jonas shook, his hands, meant for axe and rifle, fumbling over her shoulders, her back, her tangled hair. He traced her neck, breath hot, heart unchained. Amara quivered, a faint cry escaping her throat. Her fingers clutched his coarse shirt, as though anchoring herself to life itself. Each touch carried hunger and caution both. Jonas drew the heavy blanket over them. Firelight cast their shadows against the wall. Two forms entwined, awkward, unyielding. They rushed nothing, took nothing, but wove each moment like threads of new memory laid over old scars. "I am here, and I will stay," Amara whispered, her lips brushing his chest. Jonas's throat closed. No tears fell, but his soul heaved. He pressed his face into her hair, smoky and warm. "Thank you for not leaving." That night, the cabin no longer echoed only with wind. It filled with quickened breath, broken whispers, and heat spreading into the timbers. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, after 10 years of darkness, Jonas Mercer's heart burned anew. The fire lit not by fear, but by choice, and by Amara Cole's love. Morning broke white and dim, the mountains still buried under last night's snow. Drifts pressed heavy on the cabin roof, groaning whenever the wind tore through. Jonas stepped into the yard, squinting against the glare of ice. He was used to the vast silence of these peaks, but today the air felt different, weighted as if carrying omen. Hoofbeats sounded from afar, at first faint as a drum, then louder, beating hard against the slope. Jonas exhaled, tightened his grip on the axe. Malcolm was not a man to give up. Soon a line of riders appeared, cloaks and scarves snapping in the wind. At the front rode Malcolm Ashworth, face flushed with drink and pride. Behind him trailed not only the 2 hired guns, but also townsfolk, the blacksmith, the saloon keeper, even the preacher who quoted scripture on Main Street. Malcolm reined in before the cabin, voice booming like theater for his gathered audience. "There she is, my woman, stolen by a mountain hermit." The cabin door opened. Amara stepped out, scarf drawn tight, her dark eyes blazing like fire pressed to the edge. The town had already whispered about her. Now Malcolm's words poured oil on every flame. "Look here." Malcolm waved the contract, flapping like a banner. "Signed and sealed. He hides her in the mountains to sate his craving. A widower 10 years, now cloaking lust in rescue. My rightful bride." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I heard the same. "Where's she from, anyhow?" A colored girl tied to Ashworth. Mercer was always odd. Now we see why each word pierced Amara like needles. Shame burned her face. She wanted to cry the truth, that she never chose, that the contract was chains, but her throat locked. Jonas stepped onto the porch, his shadow long over the snow, his gray stare fixed on Malcolm. "Shut your mouth, Ashworth." Malcolm sneered. "If you're clean, why not take her to the judge? Marry her proper? Or is it fear that the town will learn she was sent here to be shared like cattle?" Laughter rippled, sharp and cruel. Jonas's muscles tightened, but he held. To brandish the rifle now would only seal the lie. He drew a deep breath, voice steady. That paper is filth. I won't see it used to cage a human being. But the crowd wavered, rumor spreading quick as wildfire. A woman whispered, "If she's innocent, why not leave?" A man barked, "Mercer used to be decent." Now he's led by lust. Amara felt every eye. Cold, judging, curious. Her hands clutched her cloak. For a heartbeat, she longed to flee into the woods. But Jonas's hand pressed firm at her back, solid as a timber post. He spoke no word, yet she stood her ground. Malcolm, seeing it, swelled with spite. He raised his hand. "Remember this day, people. Mercer defies the law, defies honor. When I return, it won't be words alone." He wheeled his horse, rode off. The others scattered slow, but none cast the cabin a kind glance. They left behind air thick with suspicion and scorn. By dusk, shadows swallowed the slope. Jonas barred the door, face drawn. The cabin, once refuge, now felt like a cage under siege. Amara sat by the hearth, clutching her scarf, head bowed. Her breath shook, as if even a draft might shatter her. At last she spoke, hoarse. "Jonas, you see it. They'll never see me as a person. To them, I'm only a thing." Jonas knelt before her, rough hands closing over her trembling ones. "Listen to me, Amara. I've lived long enough to know talk is wind. Today they spit, tomorrow they'll chase another tale. But one thing I know for certain, you are not a thing." Tears slid down Amara's cheeks. She wanted to believe, yet shame still cut raw. Jonas's hand brushed them away, his gaze softened. "If it comes to it, I'll stand against the whole town." The fire crackled, light painting their faces. A weathered man, a weary but proud woman. In silence they held hands, warmth stitching torn edges of a day spent in disgrace. That night the wind howled through the ridges, Malcolm's horse still haunting their thoughts. The cabin no longer felt safe. Every creak in the trees, every shadow in the snow carried threat. Yet in that fragile space, two souls drew strength, not from solitude but from each other's grip, from eyes that dared to face fear. Jonas sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the dark. Amara lay on the bed, sleepless, listening to his steady breath. And she knew from this night on the cabin was no longer mere shelter. It had become a fortress, where two stood against the world outside. Morning in Cedar Ridge lay gray as ash. Fog draped the rooftops, and the church bell rang cold in the damp air. The market square bustled, hawkers shouting, laughter laced with mockery, whispers threading between stalls. Rumors of Amara and Jonas had spread across town, fodder for every corner and shop. Amara pulled her shawl tight, clutching a worn leather book to her chest. Jonas walked beside her, broad, silent. He had not wanted her here, among those harsh eyes, but she had said it plain. "I won't let him decide my honor." Not again. As they stepped into the square, chatter swelled, faces turned, sneers flashing. Near the stone well stood Malcolm Ashworth, black cloak stark against the fog, flanked by his henchmen and curious townsfolk. At sight of her, his smile cut sharp. "Well, the living proof of theft. Come to confess, have you?" Amara gave no answer. She mounted the wooden steps before the hall, hand trembling, eyes black and burning. Jonas stood behind her, his shadow covering half her back. She opened the leather book. Pages yellowed, ink unsteady. The crowd murmured, "What's that?" "Her book?" Her voice came hoarse yet clear. "This is my journal, written by my own hand, from the first days I was forced into marriage." She turned a page, eyes sweeping the lines. Then, with the whole square watching, she read aloud. "The day they made me sign the contract, I heard him say, 'The bride shall live with the gentleman and his mistress.' They laughed while I cried. They sealed it as if branding stock. My name, my will, gone. I was only a thing to be traded." Silence rippled. The wind brushed the rooftops. Murmurs rose again, but different now. Less mockery, more shock, even anger. Amara lifted her head, tears brimming, but her voice steady. "You think I came to steal?" "Number. I came because I fled. If any of you have daughters, sisters, would you let them be sold on paper?" The murmurs swelled. "God above, can it be true? A contract like that. What honor is left? Ashworth disgraces us all." Malcolm surged forward, face taut. "Lies. Scribbles in a worthless book. Who'd believe it?" Amara met his eyes, then read louder. "The day they loaded me onto the wagon, my mother knelt weeping. He said, 'Think of it as trading a cow for a black girl.'" The words split the square. Gasps, curses, faces reddening with fury. A middle-aged woman covered her mouth, eyes wet. Behind her, Jonas's fists clenched, but his gaze stayed on Amara. Pride beat through him at the fire in her words. Amara closed the book, voice thick yet clear. "I don't ask for pity. I only ask the truth be known. If my honor is smeared, then I'll fight to win it back." Applause broke out, sudden and sharp. An old blacksmith rose to his feet. "She's right. We can't stay silent while filth like that stands." More voices joined, anger rolling like a tide. Sneers turned to nods, to cries of agreement. A few women came forward, eyes shining with kinship. Malcolm faltered, color draining. He barked, "You fools! You'd believe a colored woman over me?" But his voice fell flat. The crowd's eyes were no longer on Amara. They were on him, narrowed with contempt. Young men glared, spitting in the snow. Jonas stepped closer, standing tall behind her. He needed no words. His stance, his steady eyes, told the square he was her wall. Amara turned, caught the silver of his gaze. For one heartbeat, she knew she was not alone. Malcolm bit his lip, stuffed the contract inside his coat, and signaled his men. Cloak flaring, he slipped into the fog, leaving mutters of scorn behind. By evening, the market thinned. Amara sat on the steps, clutching her journal. Her heart still pounded, but her breath came lighter than in years. Jonas sat beside her, silent. At last he spoke, voice low, warm. "You did what I never dared, stood before them all." Amara gave a broken laugh, eyes red. "I had nothing left to lose." Jonas shook his head. "No, you have everything. You have me." Her eyes widened, then lowered, lips trembling. In the dusk, they sat side by side. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but like a blanket over two hearts that had weathered a storm. Above the mountain, the sun broke through gray clouds, faint and fragile. Its light fell over the square where Amara Cole had turned scorn into strength, laughter into applause. And behind her stood the man whose presence made plain to all she was no longer alone. In the days after that stand in the square, Cedar Ridge was no longer the same. Malicious whispers began to fade, replaced by another tale, of the woman who had stood before the crowd, reading her journal like a brand of truth no one could deny. Of the widower who stood behind her, silent yet unyielding, until the whole square bowed its head. At first, there were still wary looks when Amara and Jonas appeared. But slowly, those looks changed into nods of greeting, even faint smiles. At the market stall one morning, Mrs. Collins the baker quietly handed Amara a small sack of cornmeal and said, "Try making cornbread. A strong girl like you deserves a taste of sweetness here." Amara faltered, but her chest swelled. For the first time she had been met not with pity or scorn, but with genuine goodwill. The cabin on the mountainside changed too. It was no longer a house of silence broken only by the axe's thud. Now, when one stepped inside, there was soft laughter, the smell of cornbread, and a fire that seemed to burn warmer. One morning, Amara fumbled with cornmeal and honey. Her hands scattered flour across the rough table. Jonas passed by, lips twitching as he tried to hold back a smile. He picked up the spoon from her hand, his broad fingers covering hers, guiding the rhythm. "Not so hard. Let the dough breathe." Amara laughed, clear and light. She looked down at their joined hands and felt her face flush. Jonas froze, his gray eyes turning aside, though a small smile lingered at his mouth. In that moment the cabin brimmed with life, far from the cold silence of before. Outside, the hammer rang against fence posts. Jonas worked on the corral, while Amara carried water, setting the jug beside him. He looked up, sweat streaking his temple. Without thinking, she brushed it away. The gesture startled her, yet Jonas held her gaze deep and steady, before nodding and turning back, his half-hidden smile betraying him. By evening, they cleaned side by side, Amara sweeping dust, Jonas stacking wood. When she bent to pick up a scrap, his hand brushed her shoulder in passing. The touch was light, but both stood still, hearts jolting. At supper, the firelight threw warm glow across the table. Amara placed her first cornbread before Jonas, laughing nervously. "It might be edible, if you're not too particular." Jonas cut a slice, chewed slow, and kept his eyes on her. Then he nodded. "Good." Amara laughed, relief breaking through. Her hand pressed her chest as if to steady her breath. The sound of her laughter filled the cabin, and Jonas felt a weight lift. How long had it been since this house had known laughter? Not since before his wife was laid in the ground. Gradually, the town came closer too. One afternoon, the old blacksmith trudged up the slope with a new set of horseshoes. He gave Amara a nod of respect. Another day, children scampered around the cabin, giggling when Amara handed out pieces of cornbread. Small things, yet each wove a thread of trust. Trust that Amara was no outcast. Trust that Jonas was no longer a brooding hermit, but a man living again beside a woman of strength. That night, the cabin was quiet. Jonas sat by the fire, turning an unlit pipe in his hand. Amara sat nearby, mending an old scarf. The flames painted her face, her dark eyes gleaming. Jonas spoke at last, his voice low. "The first day I found you in the storm, I thought only to keep you alive. But now I see, you've brought life back into me." Amara looked up, her heart hammering. She did not answer, only smiled softly, her needle trembling in her hand. Those words would stay with her. Jonas reached out, his rough palm resting lightly on her hand. Their eyes met, And in the silence both knew trust had shifted, not just in the town, but within their own hearts. Beyond the window, the moon rose over the mountains, silver light spread across the snow. The small cabin glowed like a lantern in the wilderness, filled with laughter, the scent of cornbread, and two souls once swallowed by darkness, now finding light together. The hard winter finally broke. On the Montana slope, the last patches of snow pulled back, bearing dark soil heavy with moisture, sharp with the smell of new grass. A faint warmth rode the wind across the hillside where the little cabin stood, once a place of silence, now stirring with signs of change. Jonas rose early, the wooden plow balanced across his shoulder. Amara followed in a lighter shawl, a basket of corn seed in her arms, the gift Mrs. Collins had pressed into her hands back in town. Together they walked to the narrow strip of ground beside the cabin, a plot long choked with weeds and thorn, now cleared for the first planting. "This ground's stubborn," Jonas muttered, voice low as the blade bit through the packed earth. Amara stooped to scatter seed along the opened row, her slender hands trembling but careful. She caught her breath and said with a half-smile, "Hard ground holds the seed tighter. Roots grow stronger." Jonas glanced over. Sunlight glinted in her dark eyes, sweat shining on her brow. His chest tightened. When her hand hovered over the seed, his rough palm closed lightly across hers. The touch was brief, but neither pulled away. Amara looked up, found his gray eyes softened, and smiled. In that moment, planting was no longer work, but a quiet vow, that they were sowing not just corn, but the shape of a home. By noon they rested under a pine, splitting cold cornbread. Jonas, a man of few words, surprised himself by asking, "Back home, did you ever plant corn yourself?" Amara laughed, clear as spring water. "I only watched my father. Never thought I'd live to sow it, beside a man like you." Jonas dropped his gaze, but a rare smile broke across his face. The days turned to a rhythm of work and breath. They mended the horse corral together, Jonas with the hammer, Amara steadying the beam. When a nail fought the wood, he set his hand on her shoulder to brace her. Her curls brushed his jaw, and he startled back, only for both of them to laugh. One evening, with the sun gone red behind the ridge, Jonas placed an old Bible in her hands, its spine worn thin. "Years I never opened it, but if you read, I'll listen." Amara's eyes glistened. She turned a page, voice soft but ringing. "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud." Jonas sat still, eyes shut, broad hands resting heavy on his knees, as if letting the words seep into ground long hardened. When she paused, he whispered, "Your voice makes them breathe again." "I thought they died with her." Amara laid the book aside, her trembling hand seeking his. He did not draw away. They sat until the last light sank, their fingers laced, the silence speaking what words could not. Slowly, the cabin itself shifted. Amara hung a pale cloth at the window, stitched from a scrap of linen. At first, Jonas barely noticed, but one evening he paused, staring at sunlight breaking through its weave, turning the room to gold. Across the table, Amara set a jar of wildflowers, her dark hair bent over the stems. His chest swelled with something unfamiliar, the sense that the cabin was no longer a place to endure, but a place alive. Another night, as she bent over a torn coat, Jonas stepped near, laying a hand on her shoulder. She lifted her face, found his gaze steady and gentle. No words passed, yet both knew. Closeness had grown familiar, no longer awkward, no longer fought. On the final day of planting, the sun poured gold across their small field. Amara held the last seed in her hand. As she stooped to press it down, Jonas caught her wrist. "Let me." Her heart raced as he opened her palm, set the seed in the furrow, and covered it with soil. Together they pressed it down, his hand over hers, eyes locked. The sinking sun bathed them in light, turning the act into a vow without speech. Amara whispered, "So we've sown it all." Jonas nodded, his hand still clasping hers. "And come harvest, we'll reap together." That night, the cabin was filled with the scent of fresh cornbread. Amara smiled as Jonas finished the largest piece, awkwardly saying, "Tastes like March sun." Her soft laughter curved her lips, and her dark eyes shone with peace she had never dared dream. Outside, the spring wind rolled through the pines, rich with promise. Inside, two souls had learned to plant not only seed in soil, but seed in each other. Trust, nearness, love, roots deep as the land itself. Winter came early the following year, heavier than any Jonas could remember. Snow buried the Montana slope, and the little cabin braced itself against the storm, its chimney sending up thick smoke. Inside, the fire glowed bright, not only for warmth, but in waiting for something new, the birth of a child. Amara lay on the bed, sweat streaming through the wind still pressed cold through the cracks. Her face was pale, her dark eyes blazing with pain and resolve. Beside her, Mrs. Collins, the old midwife from town, guided each breath. At the head of the bed, Jonas held Amara's hand, his broad, calloused fingers trembling so hard they seemed clumsy. "Hold on, Amara. I'm right here," his voice rasped, breaking against the howl of the wind. Amara bit down until her lip bled, yet her eyes never left him. In his gaze she saw more than worry. She saw love, deep, unwavering, the kind she had not known could be hers. The first cry split the air, thin, sharp, but strong enough to pierce the storm outside. Mrs. Collins lifted the wriggling bundle, smiling. "A healthy girl." Jonas froze, breath caught in his chest. He watched as the child was placed in Amara's arms, then leaned close, his gray eyes blurred with tears. For 10 long years, he had believed his heart was buried with his wife. But now, at the sound of a newborn cry, it beat again, wild and full of a love he had thought gone forever. Amara pressed her lips to her daughter's brow, whispering, "My little girl." Jonas sat down beside them, folding both into his arms. The tiny hand curled around his rough finger, and at that touch, his tears fell hot upon his cheek. My child," his voice cracked. "Thank the Lord." Amara turned toward him, her own tears spilling, tears of joy. The cabin that once knew only silence and the moan of wind now held a chorus of cries, laughter, and the steady rhythm of hearts beating together. In the days that followed, snow still fell thick, but inside the cabin, life stirred. Amara, though weak, smiled through her exhaustion as she cradled the infant. Jonas hovered close, awkward but tireless, stoking the fire, heating milk, fumbling through the change of cloth. Hands once made for axe and rifle learned the fragile weight of a child. One night, as Amara slept, Jonas sat by the cradle, his eyes fixed on the small face. He offered his finger, felt the tiny grip close firm around it, and whispered, "I thought I had nothing left to give. But you've proven this heart can live again." The baby breathed softly, her hand tightening. Jonas laughed through his tears, a sound rough and raw, but filled with hope he'd thought lost. As Amara's strength returned, the cabin filled with song. She rocked the baby by the fire, voice gentle as a mountain stream. Jonas, splitting wood outside, would pause at the doorway just to watch, her face glowing in the firelight, eyes full of tenderness. He could not turn away. One afternoon, with the sun sinking gold across the snow, Jonas carried his daughter out into the cold. He lifted her high, letting the light fall across her opening eyes. Wind bit his skin, but warmth surged inside. "You'll grow up here, little one, among these mountains, but you'll never know loneliness, not while your mother and I are here." Amara stepped out, a blanket draped over her shoulders, watching them with her chest tight. She had never dared dream of a home like this, yet here it was before her eyes. Even in town, whispers changed. People no longer spoke of Jonas Mercer as only the brooding widower. They spoke of him as a father. The sight of him cradling his child, joy blazing in his worn face, softened even the hardest judgment. Mrs. Collins visited one evening, placing a knitted blanket into Amara's hands. "This child will change more than your home," she said softly. "She'll change him." "She may even change this town." Amara clutched the blanket, her eyes shining with gratitude. That night, the storm raged outside, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady. The baby cried, then hushed in Amara's arms. Jonas sat close, tears streaking his weathered cheeks unchecked. For the first time in years, he felt life was more than mere survival. He whispered, to himself, to the wife he had buried, and to the sky beyond the snow, this heart was never dead. It was only waiting, waiting to live again in her cry, in Amara's eyes. And as the wind wailed across the ridge, the cabin glowed like a beacon, marking the hour when a true family was born, out of ash, out of storm. Winter came again, draping Montana's ridges in white. Snow lay heavy on the cabin roof, burying the trail to town. Yet inside the little house, warmth filled the air, not only from the fire but from laughter, from a child's babble, from the sound of familiar footsteps. A year had passed since Amara placed her daughter into Jonas's arms. Now the child toddled along the floor, gripping the table's edge, leaving tiny prints across the worn boards. A cabin once somber now rang with life. Cedar Ridge itself had begun to change. At first there were only nods of courtesy, then came visits. Mrs. Collins still brought bread and wool. The old smith fixed Jonas's horseshoes and waved off payment. Some days children from town climbed the hill, playing with the little girl until the yard rang with shouts of joy. Amara welcomed them with open arms, knowing well that acceptance was a gift not to be taken lightly. Jonas stood watching it all, bewildered. Once he had believed this cabin a prison, built only to house him after grief. But now it had become the heart of new life. He was no longer only the widower of the mountain. He was a husband, a father, a neighbor the town had begun to claim as their own. One morning, Amara opened the door, the scent of cornbread spilling out, her daughter babbling against her shoulder. Jonas paused in his work, axe set aside, and walked toward them. His rough hand brushed the curls of the child, then rested gently on Amara's shoulder. "You've turned this place into a home," he murmured, his voice breaking against the cold air. Amara smiled, eyes bright. Not alone, Jonas. You raised the walls, lit the fire, planted the seed. I only added the laughter. Jonas lowered his head, took her hand in his, and held fast. A silent vow, stronger than words. That evening, as dusk painted the sky purple, they walked together to the stubbled cornfield. Jonas carried the child high on his shoulder, while Amara kept close beside him. The stalks, dry and broken, stood like memories against the snow. The wind blew sharp, but their hearts were at peace. Next season, we'll plant again, Amara whispered. Jonas nodded. He knew she meant more than corn. She meant trust, life, the future. That night, Amara read aloud from the Bible, her voice flowing soft in the firelight. Jonas sat beside her, the child asleep against his chest. On the wall, their shadows stretched, man, woman, child, etched like a painting of family into the winter night. Jonas listened to every word, but more than scripture, he listened to the heartbeat pressed against him, the breath of the woman at his side. When Amara closed the book, Jonas lifted his gaze, his eyes bright with firelight. This house, he said, isn't built of wood or stone, Amara. It's built by your hands, by your eyes. Amara said nothing, only laced her fingers with his. No reply was needed. In the silence, a promise was spoken. On another morning, snow whipped hard against the door. Jonas stepped out onto the porch, staring at a world drowned in white. For once, he did not feel cold. Amara came beside him, her hand slipping into his. Together they stood, watching the snow fall in silence. Jonas drew a long breath. Memories pressed in, the years of widowed nights, the winters when he believed his heart dead. He had thought a house was four walls keeping out the wind. But now, with Amara's hand in his, with the cry of a child inside, he understood. A true home was not built of timber. A true home was the woman beside him, the gaze unafraid to meet his, the warmth he thought forever lost. He turned, whispered, "Now I know. At last I am home." Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes in peace, as if the snow itself had laid quiet over every old wound. Outside, the wind still howled, snow falling heavy over the ridge. Yet on the cabin porch, two figures stood firm, hand in hand, as if nothing could shake them. Inside, the fire burned bright. The child slept smiling in her dreams. And so, after storms and years of silence, the cabin that once was only shelter had become a true home. Not because it was raised of wood, but because within it lived hands, eyes, and hearts that had chosen love. If this story stirs old memories of winters past, or of a home once warm with laughter, we invite you to share them below in the comments. We'd love to hear your reflections on love, family, and faith. And don't forget to press like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll never miss another story. Your presence keeps this fire burning bright.